Hi, my name is Jim Hilborn,
And I'm Tom Dinas.
and we are the Small Business Doctors.
And I've been taking care of business every day. Taking care of business every way. I've been taking care of business. It's all mine. Taking care of business and working overtime.
We're going to talk tonight about one of the most perplexing decisions, I think, for people who are going into business for themselves, and that is the question of what type of business should I be in? Now, when I say type of business, I'm not talking about what business you're in, so plumbing supply or restaurant or law. I'm talking about the form of your business. And there are some reasons that you should take some time and think about what form of business you're going to take, because it may have some great tax advantages for you. It might have some tax disadvantages for you. It may, in my part of the world, it may have some liability against outside third-party claims against you as an individual if you organize your business correctly. Or it could, in fact, expose you to civil liability for the acts of another person in your business, or for yourself, where you're acting in the business's name and suddenly your personal assets that you did not intend to be part of the business are now at risk and subject to a creditor's claim. So it's very important that we start fresh, and we start basically with some idea of what these business entities are all about. Now, there's just a few that I'm going to start with, and that's one of which is a sole proprietorship. A sole proprietorship is the way I grew up thinking about business people, that, you know, the guy owns a business, he buys and he sells. At the end of the day, he knows how much inventory he's got left, and he figures how much money's in the cash register, and that kind of tells him whether he made any money or lost money. And at the end of the year, he totals it all up and figures out whether he's on top or on bottom. The second form, and I think we're all familiar with that, is that of a partnership. There, you and I, or you and 3 other people, or you and a dozen other people go into business, and you have a common business purpose, and you work toward that common business purpose. You may not all be fully engaged in it, but you may be fully involved and fully liable for the acts of your partners. The third one is the corporation. We're all aware of a corporation. General Motors jumps to mind, and certain other manufacturing firms, that they can be very, very big, and they can be your size. They can be just you. In the state of Oregon, they can be in many other states. They can be you and another person. Sometimes it takes you and 2 other people. But at any rate, they do not have to be a large entity. They can be just you. Corporations, and when we have an S corporation, which is really and Tom's going to talk a little bit more about that. That is a tax decision that you make when you have a C corporation, and essentially allows you to be taxed as if you were a sole proprietor or a partnership. And then we have the limited liability companies, the limited liability partnerships, and there's 2 types of each, really. One of which is a member managed, that is, we take a vote to decide what we're going to do. The other is a manager managed limited liability company. Limited liability companies are relatively new in the world, and they have not been around quite as long as corporations, certainly not around as long as sole proprietorships. We're going to talk about a little bit about these things. However, from a legal point of view, if you take anything from this segment tonight, I want you to go away with the idea that I think being a sole proprietorship or a simple partnership is a very bad idea, and we'll get into why that's so. Tom, this is my partner, Tom Dinas here, and Tom and I are going to be discussing this matter, and we're going to go from there. And Tom, I want you to jump in and tell us a little bit about what we can start we've broken these things down. We actually gave it some thought. We wrote it all down, and we've decided. So we've got broken it down into some factors. Tom, why don't you elaborate a little bit?
You're actually going to let me talk?
I am
was
gonna.
getting worried about
It was almost
this
the end
here.
of the show, but so we got to let Tom in here pretty soon. But
My name's Tom Dinas, and I have been tax consultant for 25, 30 years now. Almost embarrassing how long it's been.
Isn't it?
You think I would get it right by now.
practice.
Yeah.
That's
So anyway, and the bulk of my practice has always been with the small business community, and so I'm very, very tied to their problems and what they need. And a lot of things I do is in the very beginning with new clients. Is they come in and they go, well, what should I be? And they haven't the slightest idea, because Jim and I deal with this stuff every day. He goes through the legal ramifications. I'm always into the tax laws, which are constantly changing. And so there's all these different things, and each entity has a strength. And for everything that the government giveth, it taketh away, and there's restrictions and some other level. So what we're going to do in my part of it here is emphasize the cash, tax, and financial aspects of choosing these entities. Okay? And we've got the ground rules here, so we don't get into a fight. This partnership might end very, very soon here. if
Yes,
we're
I
not
know.
Careful.
that tax stuff.
But anyway, so we're going to start. We'll start first with the sole proprietor and partnership. And the reason I want to start with those is because what has happened with the advent of the LLCs, Oregon has only been having an LLC program now for about 7 years or
I think
8
that's
years?
right.
Prior to that, it did not exist in Oregon, and so and it's considered by the IRS a disregarded entity. And what that means is the IRS doesn't have anything in its law about LLCs. They have no mention of it. There's no case law or such, and there's some developing now. But so what they said is that we don't care if you're an LLC. That's a state issue. We are just going to ignore it. And if you're a single member LLC, you're a sole proprietor, and that's how you file your tax return. And all the tax ramifications and responsibilities and perks of a sole proprietor is what you get as a single member LLC. Multi-member, you're a partnership, pure and simple. Now, and Jim and I have talked to this at length, and Jim and I both agree that it's ludicrous to be a sole proprietor or partnership anymore when you can have the same benefits as a sole proprietorship or partnership as an LLC and get some additional protection.
Right.
Jim?
That's exactly right.
So, and let's talk about that protection, because that's really a misunderstood thing by a lot of people these days. Just how much protection we get with that entity.
If you do business as a corporation, or if you do business as a limited liability company or a limited liability partnership, the law will provide you civil protection from having your personal assets used to satisfy the claims of a creditor. Now, usually in the law, we talk about things when things go wrong. We don't, as long as everybody's making money and everybody's shaking hands and working out any little details in the business, then nobody cares. When things go wrong, and this is the kind of planning that most people don't do, but you're getting the chance to do right now, assuming the business is in trouble, assuming the business has been sued, you've entered into certain agreements. Those agreements have your name on them, hopefully as a member of an LLC or as an officer of a corporation. If that's true, then those creditors that are attempting to sue you will find their way blocked. It will come by what we call the corporate shield. And that will be a shield from civil liability. In other words, your house is not on the line. The only thing that's going to be at risk are the assets owned by the business. And that's fair, because the creditors only look to those assets when they extended you credit, be that product or services or cash in the case of a bank.
Right.
So that's why sole proprietorships and partnerships do not offer you any sort of that kind of protection. That's why we want you to be some form of protected business entity.
But it comes with responsibility. You have certain records that need to be kept, right?
That's exactly
Yeah.
right.
And one of our shows that we're going to do is we're going to take these entities and go into them in depth. This is to give you an overview, just to kind of get you started, so you don't make some of the critical mistakes in the beginning stages. You know, and especially if you have partners, other people involved. I always call it the honeymoon stage. You know, everybody loves one another.
It's a honeymoon, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to do. You can have this, no problem. And as soon as the cash flow tightens up, and everybody's pointing their fingers, and go, oh no, that's not what I meant. I need to make my mortgage payment before you make yours. So there's lots of things that have to be dealt with. You need to have partnership agreements, you need to have corporate minutes, you need to have bylaws of the corporation. But those are, we're talking about very detailed stuff for another time. What I want to talk to you about is just the basics tonight. For example, so we've disregarded sole proprietors and partnerships completely.
Not going to do those. Not going
those.
to
No, they are
do
just,
those.
No, we
Okay.
get in trouble, malpractice, all those nasty
That's
things.
right. Bad
So
things.
our options now become basically two with subsets. We're going to have either corporate or LLC. And each one of those have an advantage. And now the LLCs have, since it's a disregarded entity, and the federal government doesn't recognize them, you operate under state law. And so you just have to meet the requirements of your particular state as far as what you need to do to maintain that. In Oregon, it's quite nominal, a very basic operating agreement, and you file your papers each year and renew them. It costs about $50 a year now, although with the budget in crisis, I think they're bumping that up a fair amount.
There's usually some kind of charge. So
there's
wherever
some
you
charge.
are.
Yeah, you're going to pay somewhere. Some states are very, like California is very expensive. I think it's a minimum of about $800, $900 a year if you have an entity other than the sole proprietorship. So these are things you have to consider. But there's also another option that the LLC, you can elect under federal law to be treated as a corporation for tax purposes. So it kind of gives you the best of both worlds. You operate under state law, which is pretty easy and easy to deal with and administer, and you can pick up some of the perks of the corporation. So now, even though you're an LLC, so we're narrowing down the field.
We
here,
are.
Okay, and so we're either an LLC or a corporation, and we can kind of disregard the corporations in a way if we wanted to, and just make the election under federal law, and the state follows that federal law for the election. So, what are our considerations? First of all, cost of setting it up.
Cost of saying
Right.
that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a big one. One of the problems I had in the past when I was dealing with clients is I said, you really need to be a corporation based on what your goals are. Now, and this is the one thing I can't stress enough is when you set up a new business, you need to have specific goals of what you're going to accomplish with this business. And that helps dictate. It's the old Alice in Wonderland, how do I get there? Well, where you going? I don't know, so it doesn't matter how you get there. So, anyway it will work. So you need to have very specifically what you want to do. And each business has different problems. Retail business is you got to accumulate a lot of inventory. Now, if you're a sole proprietor, or if you're a partnership, or an LLC taxed as a sole proprietor partnership, all your profits are going to be subject to Social Security taxes, and that's 13%. And a tax just to start with. So if you're starting up a retail business, you probably want to look at something like an S corporation. Right. That way you can accumulate that inventory, you still have profits, those profits are still taxed to you personally, but you eliminate the Social Security taxes on it. So, you have to get right in there and say, okay, this is what I need to accomplish. Do I need health insurance? Because one corporation, you can get lots of fringe benefits, the other one, not so many. And the sole proprietor and partnership type entities, you get very little benefit from fringe benefits. So that's one question. Health insurance has become so costly. I need health insurance. Okay, well, there's a couple ways we can deal with that, but if you want that as a business perk, you probably want to look at possibly a C corporation.
Right.
So, I'm kind of rambling a little bit here because as I start thinking some of these things, I just can't lay off of it because I see it so often with my business clients that that need to be dealt with. But so to create a business entity, The most expensive one is corporations, because usually you need an attorney on board to
Right.
draft documents and get it set up, and that can be pretty expensive. I mean, some attorneys are more reasonable than others, but I've had clients look into it, and they wanted some downtown Portland firm and wanted to get charged, $5,000-6,000 to do it, and so that's a restriction into that area for a lot of them, and they put it off. So, yeah.
That's right. Yeah, and a couple things there. You might you need to price your attorneys, price your financial consultants. I ask them, what they're going to do and how much they're going to pay. Don't be ashamed to ask if you're around a little bit. I mean, that doesn't hurt either. We're going to have probably a segment, or at least a part of a segment in talking how to choose a professional to help you. But yes, Tom, I think that's right. With a corporation, and let's just stop. So you're going to be a corporation, be that an S corp or what we call a C corp, being a daddy corporation, a big C corporation, or an LLC of some kind. Both of these entities require some sort of organizational paperwork. Now remember, we talked a little bit before about how we have to keep our paperwork and our money dedicated to the different entities, because we don't want it to be shown that we somehow mixed them all up and we didn't really run our business like a separate business, but we ran it like a sole proprietor or a partnership. That we don't want to do that. Now that's going to be good for you in lots of different reasons, not the least of which it's going to make you track your business expenses legitimately, so that you can tell yourself at the end of the week or at the end of the month or the end of the day, okay, I spent this much on my business and I took in this much income. Now I'm going to start knowing at the end of the week, at the end of the month, at the end of the quarter, how I'm doing. And I can make some decisions based upon, am I getting better? Am I making more money? Am I making less money? What am I looking at? What do I have to do? Now, the type of paperwork that is going to be required in any place is going to be filing in a corporation. It's going to be filing your articles of incorporation. That's going to be filed usually with the Secretary of State, sometimes the Corporation Commissioner. Somebody in the government's going to get that filing. For an LLC, that's going to be your LLC, let's say the Articles of Organization. It's going to be filed with the government. Pretty similar forms. It's very similar forms. Pretty similar cost. Not necessarily the same, but very similar. Now after that, though, in a corporation, we are going to change from, and this is a big difference, but it may have some ramifications as to the legal cost right up front and down the road. In a corporation, we have to have some initial meetings. We have to elect directors. Well, we have shareholders. We have to have subscribing shareholders. That's usually the people that own the business. That's you. They're going to elect a board of directors. They're probably going to elect you.
Think so?
Yeah, and they're going to have officers, and they're going to appoint those officers. The board of directors will appoint the officers. That's probably you. So it's very likely at the end of the first day of being a corporate entity, you're going to be a shareholder and on the board of directors and an officer. But this all has to be reflected in the minutes of your first meeting. You also have to adopt some bylaws. Why do you have to adopt the bylaws? Because that is what gives the board of directors the authority to run the business. That's what the bank's going to want to see when you open your bank account, the fact that you have the authority to open a bank account, the authority to make financial decisions. An LLC is increasingly, we understand, financial institutions want to see what's called articles of
Organization. And just recently, they're now requiring a set of organizational agreement, which wasn't required before.
Yeah.
Now, you're probably sitting out there and going,
Whoa.
God, this is really boring. Now, why do I even want to do this? Well, one thing is if you get sued, it helps protect you. Another issue is the better your records are and the better you've documented this, the more aggressive you can get with your tax planning. Because if you have it in the minutes and it's authorized by the board of directors and it's not over and above what a reasonable person would do and not against the regs of the IRS, you can justify lots of nice things that you couldn't if you didn't have the right paperwork.
That's right.
I mean, Did you ever hear about how General Motors has shareholder meetings? They spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on these meetings, lavish dinners, schmoozing the people so they vote their way. Guess what? You're a corporation. You have authorized in your minutes that you're going to have a shareholder meeting at a nice hotel on the coast for 3 days to have the meetings and update the shareholders on what's happening there. And there's all sorts of little quirks within the tax law. The tax law has tripled in length since I've been in practice. And there's all sorts of little perks that you can pick up like that, And so rather than, going out and having dinner with your wife once a month, who's also on the board of directors, shall we say, so you have a corporate meeting. Say you do that once a month. If it's documented in the corporate minutes and you don't abuse it and you don't do excessive and go out and spend $1,000 meal, but you keep it reasonable, you've now converted what was a personal expense into a business expense. So there comes a benefit with this paperwork. None of us like to do it. I don't like to do it, and I do it for a living, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
So, but the more you have documented and the better you keep your records, the more aggressive you can become. I have clients that do not maximize their tax benefit no matter how much I harp because they can't get the paperwork done. And I understand that, but it comes at a cost. So when we're talking about this sort of stuff, it's Jim and I have what we call a blue collar approach to working with our clients. We are in there to make you as profitable and give you the best chance of success of business as possible. And part of it starts with your business entity. And I kind of want to go over a little bit brief thing about some of the things that we need to talk about. We talked about the cost of setting it up. And sometimes it's easier, and sometimes what I have clients do, they say, well, I don't have money to do that. I said, well, let's start at this level. We can always make some of these elections later. So if you're an LLC, single member, you can run like that, and then things start happening, you got cash flow going, you're really doing good. Then we make some of these other elections and you can change into it. Sometimes going back is a little bit more difficult, but that's time for a whole nother story. So the cost to get in is, if you're looking, the LLC. Now flexibility is both, the LLC they're probably the most flexible, either for the partnership and for tax-wise, and the sole proprietor, because there's lots of things you can do. You're not so restricted. The corporations give you more restriction as far as how you do things. And the two corporate structures, the C and the S, differ in one major way. They're the same as far as your salaries and your interactions between you and the corporation, but the profits and losses of that corporation over and above, when you, at the end of the day or the end of the year, in a C corporation, the corporation itself is taxed on those profits and paid from the corporation. The S corporation, the main difference is those profits or losses flow out to you. It's called a pass-through entity, just like a partnership and a sole proprietor. Everything passes out to the shareholders, which is, is you, and you're one and the same. Always wanted to get like 3 or 4 baseball hats for my clients when they come in.
Exactly.
Hand them, this is your employee hat, you put that on, and then we'll give you the owner's hat, and then for the meetings you put on your shareholder hat, just to give them an idea that you are different people to that corporation. And so the flexibility, once again, we start with the LLC. It's the most flexible, and you can get to more restriction and get some different perks. Like I said, like the C corporation has more fringe benefits. And a fringe benefit is basically something that the corporation pays for you as an employee. And since you're the shareholders and you're the board of directors, you want to treat yourself good. And so as you vote all these things in, you keep your records good. So the C corporation has some benefits there. The S corporation has had in the past a ability, since those profits come out as a dividend, a distribution, not subject to Social Security tax. And so a lot of clients play I'll reduce my Social Security benefits so I have the cash flow to do things now. So flexibility, LLC kind of wins out, and you can always change into something else. Now, another criteria, ease of operation. once again, the LLC kind of is head and shoulders above it because it operates under state law and it's not as restrictive. But once again, if you don't do the things up to the T, you need to be able to, you won't be able to utilize all the benefits. So once again, at some point in time, you got to get off your duff and say, okay, I'm going to do the dang paperwork.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
The business of business is business.
Right.
And so even though you may be a great plumber or a great electrician or a great whatever, you are going to have to take the time, if you want to own a business, to invest a couple things. First of all, invest your time in running the business and knowing what kind of money is coming in, where it's going, how it's going out. Those are business decisions. And the second thing you have to do, maybe the first thing really, is what you're doing right now, is that you're learning how business operates. It's not a mystery. You can do this, but you need to do it if you want to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, and I always use the same thing when I talk to my clients. I say, look, I said, why would I do it? I said, did you ever play Monopoly? Yeah. How'd you get your $200? You will go around go. And that's pretty much it. You need to play the game. And it is a game, and it could be fun, and there's some paperwork and there's some drudgery there, but the benefits can be substantial. I mean, you can save literally thousands of dollars a year just by watching your paperwork and getting things done right.
Which can be the difference in whether you survive
Whether
or
you
not.
make it or not, yes.
Yeah.
And I tell people, I said, Oregon just passed this law where they up the corporate tax, and everybody's, we need to get those big corporations to pay their share, and I go, the vast majority are small blue-collar workers trying to get by, and the money that I get to save for a client is sometimes grocery money. It's money to make that mortgage. So we're not talking about pie in the sky, huge stuff. This is the nuts and bolts of running a small business. So LLC seems to come out on top on that. Now, what about liability protection, Jim? I mean, is there any difference between a corporation and?
Well, LLCs are pretty darn new, and at least as the time, this is early 2010 when we're talking here. And it seems pretty clear here in our state in Oregon, and it seems pretty clear, I believe, in California, where I am not licensed to practice, that, and other places, every place that I can determine is going to afford LLCs the same kind of protection that corporations offer, which means you won't be civilly liable, and the business will stand alone unless you've guaranteed something, and that's another topic. But at any rate, I think that way is pretty much the same. Again, don't commingle the money.
Lots of things to decide long term. But once again, as I mentioned early on, is that you need those long-term goals going in so that you can talk to the people and you can start getting you need to find somebody that you're comfortable with, for one. And you need to be able to talk about these long-term goals and have somebody with a long-term relationship.
Our segment is drawing to a close here, but see you next time. Thanks a lot.